Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick, and we're here for this week's One Last Thing with co-host Slava Cooperstein. Slava, how you doing?
Well, Ken, the universe is telling me to feel pretty good today. Between Mark Andrews, saving somebody's life on an in-flight medical emergency, and Zach Orr continuing his his tremendous post-career playing path. The universe is telling me to feel good, and I'll try to do that.
We'll toss in that the Orioles getting purchased is a very big thing for Baltimore sports fans, and something that I think fans of the Orioles have been waiting for quite a long time, frankly, in terms of getting the franchise hopefully straightened out and in ownership that is as similar to Bisciotti as you can have it be, hopefully in Maryland. So we'll see, by the way, if everybody's wishes come true on that. But when we look back at 2023, we can't obviously now be entirely happy about how things went. I've got a theory that, basically every great craps roll you ever have has a final 7 out. And, there's just it's always abrupt. It always comes when you have a lot on the line, or in good seasons, it comes when you have a lot on the line. In bad seasons, it may come, early with a whimper. But this was a season where the Ravens certainly made a lot of noise.
No question, Ken. I don't think it's a stretch to say that this season, featured the best roster in Baltimore Ravens history, which is one of the reasons it was so great, and another reason why it was so disappointing that they fell short, particularly in the manner in which they did.
Yep, absolutely. So should we give the good news or the bad news? Do we want to talk about why this was a successful season or unsuccessful seasons first? I think we better go with the bad news first.
All right, let's go with the bad news. That's fine by me.
All right. Why don't you start? Pick anything, and then we'll kind of talk through that. I'll pick a reason myself.
Yeah, so, the Ravens sort of find themselves in a difficult financial situation, not just because of the amount that they spent and how they spent on some players, but also the sort of large number of free agents that are looming, going into next season. I think at some point the estimate was 43% of the snaps were going to be leaving the team or were not signed yet. There have been some signings since then, so the number may be not quite so dire. But between that and, overspending on players like Odell Beckham and Rock Ya-Sin, that is some cause for concern. And of course, like you've mentioned before, we've covered the non-statistical benefits of having Odell Beckham on the team. But right now, what we're really talking about is how much he's going to be, against the cap.
Yeah, after and likely after he's gone, there's a chance they can re-sign him. They did structure something that would allow for the Beckham cap hit to be deferred a little more, but it is still a costly proposition. The Ravens, they went pretty heavy on void years this year. Part of it was their own roster and the construction after Jackson, but also part of it was coming out of the COVID years and being a team that was good during that time. There was a pretty big disparity from top to bottom in terms of how much cap room teams had. So teams that had to deal with a shrunken cap that already had a talented roster, they were really paying pretty well, like the Ravens, have had more of a void year need. It really wouldn't have been the Ravens' choice, I don't think, to go as heavily into void years as they did. But they did so at a time, and this is a conversation Voss and I have had a lot, where they were about to lose a bunch of players. They knew it. They, in a lot of ways, you talk about a window closing. I think this team is built to be restructured very quickly. They have the quarterback. They have the key defensive players in Roquan and Hamilton. They have Zay Flowers. They have an offensive line that's well put together right now. Got a question in offensive tackle. They've got to figure out. But they do have other players on the offensive line, including some younger players who appear to be guys they can count on. So, am I comfortable with the spending? I'm not. I always really dislike overspending in the way the Ravens did this year, but I think the team is nonetheless it's structured to react to this pretty well.
Yeah, I think they'll be able to sort of reload very quickly, particularly if they have another sort of immediately impactful draft class like they did this year. I mean, hitting on your, I think what sort of marred some of the post Super Bowl seasons for the Ravens were several very, very high round misses, just complete busts. And what we've seen in the past few years are some first round hits, and it's a completely different story, particularly when you get hit on a star like Zay Flowers and Kyle Hamilton.
Yeah, no, those were certainly big hits, and even Adafeowe is a hit. Patrick Queen, probably a little bit less of a hit, but still a hit. There's Bateman is the only one really of the last several years that really hasn't lived up to performance, lived up to expectations, I would say. And in his case, it's been largely a case of injuries, which had been a problem, of course, before. The 2020 draft class, though, is now gone. And most of them are going to be gone. It's Queen, Dobbins, Madubuike, who may stay, Duvernay, and Stone, all UFAs. And that's not even the entire list. Broderick Washington is going to stay, and somebody else is also signed. But in case, it's a group that pretty darn good draft class, and yet the Ravens weren't able to get to a Super Bowl with that group.
Yeah, it's a real shame. This was a pretty maligned draft class for some time, but it's almost like kind of funny that Stone was really one of the first ones to sort of come on and start to like prove, and it's like, okay, you hit on your 7th round pick, but everybody else sort of isn't really, and Madubuike strategically waited until his 4th year to fully break out. I'm of course joking, but he really did break out in his last season, and really became the star of this class. But Queen, years 3 and especially this past year 4, really came on, and you got to be very happy for him. Just as a guy who took a lot of flack for a while, not all of it undeserved, but really improved and is going to make himself some money and hopefully garner at least a comp pick out the door.
Right. I think all true, and we certainly wish Patrick Queen the best in future endeavors. I don't see any way he's back with the Ravens. The Madubuike thing will actually cause the Ravens quite a obstacle this offseason, much like the Lamar Jackson contract last year did, that they really had to resolve that before they could work on their other problems. And Madubuike, if they tag him, then they'll be in the same position they were with Lamar, just not quite as bad, that they have a huge cap number that they can't, it's intractable, and they can't maneuver around very easily if Madubuike is sitting out there at 20 million or so or thereabouts. And they'll have to figure out how to either how to process him off that tag very quickly. They can do it 3 ways. They can sign him beforehand, they can trade him afterwards, or they can tag him and then quickly move him off that tag and onto a long-term deal. But he can't really stay on the tag very long if the Ravens going to have a successful offseason.
Well, in some ways, it's a good problem to have. Your guy played well enough for his franchise tag number to be worth it. And that's a heck of a thing to say, because, at the end of the day, franchise tag means that you have to be willing to, deal with the consequence of not being able to trade him or not be able to extend him. Of course, they could trade him for, next to nothing, but they're not going to do that. I don't see them trading him for, any less than a 2nd round pick of some sort, an interior defensive lineman who can, collapse the pocket is, just it's such a engine for the defense that I certainly wouldn't be happy with anything less than a 2nd.
Yeah. So it's a problem. I'm sure Voss and I'll get into that more in terms of the specifics, but I'm with you in terms of what would be kind of the minimum level of compensation even to take the risk because you've got him on your roster, then he's on your roster in that sense. The team never addressed their offensive tackle situation this year is another reason why I think you have to mitigate some of the success they had. They had Band-Aid solutions for this year, but nothing about the long-term solution at the position. Obviously, McCary is not the solution long-term at left tackle. That's obvious to me. I don't know if it's obvious to everyone out there. Some people may really disagree with me. Faalele played a little better than he had before in a very limited number of snaps, replacing Moses on the right side. Moses is very fortunately played very well, and Ronnie played well enough at the end of the year that I'm now tipped on that side of the teeter-totter to you don't cut him. You keep Ronnie through to 2024. You try and find that 1-year bridge solution to having a 2025 tackle who you draft in 24.
Yeah, and I think that's a positive development regarding Ronnie, but I think that position ought to be tempered by the idea that it's relative to what the other option is, which is go ahead and get yourself, go and get yourself a left tackle with our limited cap space and limited draft capital. So it is. Certainly Ronnie Stanley did, endorse himself into being the guy, I think, at least for, the first part of the season, if not all of next season. But certainly that should not be read as to saying that that's not a, at or near the top of the list of positions that we desperately need to address. And I know that's not what you're saying, Ken. I'm just saying, when people hear you say that, I think they should understand it with that context.
Yeah. So just another problem. Other reasons you would have why the season, it was unsuccessful because of.
Yeah, I guess the last thing I would say is the 2023 Ravens team is going to be more or less relegated to trivia questions for Ravens fans about what's the best Ravens team that didn't make it. Nobody's really gonna care about these guys except for people who are sort of, looking at like historic DVOA numbers and things like that. We all fondly remember the 2006 team, the 2011 team, and sort of the 2019 team, and the 2019 team even, is going to probably be better remembered than the 2023 team just because of some of the crazy, statistical, output in terms of historic efficiency and Lamar's unanimous MVP season. And those are good reasons to remember that team. It's just, I think it's without a doubt the greatest Baltimore Ravens roster. Didn't make it. If they had won last weekend and won the Super Bowl, they would be without a doubt remembered as one of the greatest teams in NFL history.
Yeah. And that's that failure to cement the legacy is probably the biggest negative to me. Of course, the reason I go back to the craps roll analogy is this. The place this team was in last camp, last OTAs, was not a good place. I mean, Lamar Jackson was not signed. Lamar Jackson and the front office, they weren't sniping each other, but Lamar was very unhappy and was willing to use social media to make some comments. Some that he might not have, some that really underscored the problem with having no agent, as being a difficult situation. The organization ridiculously in the NFL being accused of collusion when the truth of the matter was the Ravens were never going to let Lamar go. And no other team wanted to set the price on Lamar because that then would raise the price of getting a quarterback in general. And it doesn't really make sense. So if the franchise tag process allowed Lamar Jackson to actually leave, which it does not, then he'd had a more leverage in the situation. In fact, he got an excellent deal. I think the highest paid quarterback in football at the time, or very close to it. And the Ravens got an excellent deal, as it turned out. Lamar Jackson's season this year was worth 75 or 80 million. It wasn't just worth 50. If you really were thinking about it, you'd give up Madubuike as well to have a Lamar Jackson on the roster. Now, that won't necessarily work out, and this ends up being a very good free agent signing in terms of re-signing Lamar Jackson. But if you look at what was wrong with the roster, all the cornerback stuff, all the injuries there, the patching it together with, Rock Ya-Sin coming in to be the number 2 cornerback, and he didn't really sniff the field very much at all. Ronald Darby being brought in, I mean, that was kind of a joke because Ronald Darby had replaced Kyle Fuller in the slot at Denver. We're not talking about a great football player here. We didn't think we were. Ronald Darby, with the coaching, with the scheme they had an excellent year, and the cornerbacks worked out. And as everything started to fall into place, the Ravens stayed a little healthier than other teams as the season moved along. Our expectations, of course, grew with the team, but we can't, go back to the craps analogy. We can't just call it an unsuccessful season because they lost the last game they played. 31 out of 32 teams, that happens in some form. Obviously, some of them, they don't actually lose their last regular season game when they don't make the playoffs. So there's a few of those, but most teams, they lose their last game of the season, and that's the abruptness of the NFL.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think that, earlier in this season, you might have posed the question to me, if they get to an AFC championship but don't win it, do you consider that to be successful season? And I said yes, and I meant it, and I still think that's the case. I think the issue isn't so much that they lost the final game; it's the manner in which they lost it, which we'll get to. But I did want to just add, though, when we talk about one of the greatest, teams in Baltimore history and NFL history, I also think this is the greatest coaching staff from top to bottom that we've had in Baltimore history, which makes it sting all that much more.
I would agree with that. The Ravens have had good defensive coordinators. McDonald, I think, will be remembered as one of the best. Don't know if people will think of him more highly than of Lewis, or they probably will think of him at least as highly as Ryan. Martindale right now has a kind of a cloud over his head relative to this, and he's being compared on this basis to McDonald, but excellent defensive coordinator who really deserves his due. But I think you're right. I mean, I think on that side of the ball, they were very good. They've had Harbaugh, who's probably their best coach at any point in the team's history. And then they've had Monken, who, when you compare him to the other offensive coordinators, at least, is outstanding still. Yeah,
and when you for my money, I would say that I think it's kind of the thing with Mike Macdonald is that it's 2 seasons that you have to go on. I would say that his 2-season run is as good, if not better, than any other 2-season run with for a defensive coordinator in Baltimore history. I think he did.
Lewis 2000, 2001.
Yeah,
Lewis,
I mean, I would say
99, 2000.
I think that I think if you want to say Lewis was better, I think I'm fine with that. I don't think that's crazy. But certainly with respect to him and Rex, I think McDonald did more with less. Okay. I think the number of superstars and future Hall of Famers that Rex had on his roster was significantly more than either Marvin or Mike Macdonald had. Okay. It's not like they fielded a bunch of scrubs, but a lot of guys who were just guys everywhere else that they played in their career.
Well, that's fair. That's certainly fair. Let's celebrate a little bit in terms of what was really special about this season and what makes this one of the most successful. I think you started off with one of the first things, and I think it's worth re-harping on for a second, is just by non-traditional measures like DVOA, the Ravens are one of the greatest teams that has ever strapped them on. And, the fact that they lost in the playoffs is not unprecedented. I don't think this team will be remembered in the same way by other fan bases, but this will be our 1998 Vikings. You know, the team that was 15-1 and lost in the NFC Championship game on a field goal late by a kicker who had not missed a field goal all season, I don't think, at that point, where he hadn't missed a field goal from some distance.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, in terms of DVOA and just, you know, most other metrics, is just an incredibly balanced team, offense, defense, and special teams performing at, you know, extremely high levels throughout. I mean, it was by far the most complementary team that the Ravens have ever had, and that's sort of the other than, you know, the 2000 season. You know, the Ravens teams afterwards that had the most success were the teams which did have some of that offensive and defensive balance. You know, once Joe Flacco started to be sort of an asset rather than maybe not a liability, but more, you know, really he was the reason why they were winning some of the games. You know, those Ravens teams were better in 2010 and 2011 than just the, you know, defensive teams. You know, more so than the 2019 team where the defense was, you know, admirably rebuilt on the fly, but certainly not on the level of the 2023 team.
Yeah, very much so. That was a good defensive team, but yeah, it was not nearly the kind of laden with star potency that this current team has. With you know, and this team, I think it's fair to say they did have a lot of stars. I mean, if you look at Madubuike, the outside pass rushers, Clowney and Van Noy and Owe, that's a really good threesome there. You have of course Roquan and Queen in the middle, and then you have Marcus Williams, who's, you know, playing hurt, but still he's Marcus Williams in terms of the back end, and Kyle Hamilton there as well. That's pretty great. It's just unusual to get through with a set of cornerbacks they had and have as great a defensive year as you did.
Yeah, for sure. I don't think I've ever seen anything like it. I mean, a team that just everybody knows where they're supposed to be at all times and understands their responsibilities and understands the responsibilities of every guy around them. You know, it's pretty remarkable.
Let's hope Zach Hoare keeps that with the Ravens in this in his new incarnation. Well, how about the way they knock the crap out of all the great teams they face? Because that's been a problem at times for past great Ravens teams, particularly in the early Harbaugh era, is that they were extremely good at beating the bad teams and that they had a lot of trouble beating the good teams. I wouldn't say it's just the opposite here, but this team had some trouble with some marginal teams. Cleveland at home, they lost by 2, and Cleveland really bad road defense. So they're a pretty marginal team, frankly, on the road. They lost to the Colts, of course, at home in a game where they had opportunity after opportunity to put it away. Do you look at this at this at least and say, yeah, we can take more from this season because they had such a historically great performance versus great teams? Teams 3 games over 500, teams with winning records. I mean, they set records for all of this stuff. Of course, it all comes to an end, crashing down when they beat a team or lost to a team that fell into all those categories in the AFC Championship.
Yeah, you know, it certainly sort of hardens your team and makes them mentally tougher when they you know, can come out and execute. You know, for instance, you know, when I thought the you know, Rams game was sort of like an excellent, you know, job of, I mean, they didn't beat the crap out of the Rams, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it was a very good team, and they sort of kept it together, particularly, you know, having the ability to receive the, I think they received the kickoff in overtime, went 3 and out, and then they kept the Rams to a 3 and out as well. And being, you know, mentally tough enough to do that, to give yourself another shot, you know, basically playing all these teams tough or beating the crap out of them, I think is that's valuable experience, particularly for these, you know, younger players like Zay Flowers and Isaiah Likely, who, you know, need that exposure, you know, under the brightest lights, because, you know, it's not easy, as last weekend proved. Sometimes it can be too much, and the more times you have that experience, and we have a great number of primetime games, right? The better.
Yep. All right, absolutely. You want to give us another reason why this was a successful season from your point of view?
Well, I think one of the biggest things is that Lamar ended up being worth every penny, as you sort of mentioned before. Lamar, if you want to call this a watered down MVP season, I guess that's fine. But I think everything in the NFL is earned, right? I mean, just because Lamar wasn't necessarily the runaway favorite doesn't mean that that he isn't absolutely deserving of the award. He was a monster. He routinely made incredible plays, took over games, and he's playing. Statistics from the 2019 season, are one thing. That'll probably go down as his greatest statistical season, at least in a lot of metrics. But I think Lamar is playing the best football he has ever played, which is tough to say after after a poor game last weekend. But he is playing great football. I think there's more to unlock there. But the guy got his money, and he didn't just sort of rest on his laurels. He's every bit of the competitor that the Ravens had hoped he would be.
That was obviously a very big deal. Just Lamar staying healthy in some ways makes it a special season. I don't think there's any need for us to talk about that 2019 season as if it wasn't the greatest season Lamar has and probably will ever have, because it was one of the greatest seasons in NFL history by any player at any position. And regression should have been expected. It occurred. The league can react to what you do well. I don't know how you lift yourself even more above the league than Lamar Jackson did as a rookie, and the players he did it with. It's a whole different set of receivers. Did have a very good offensive line back then, but honestly, in terms of the offensive talent around him, he's got more now, and I think I wouldn't say he's done less with more in the sense that people think of it. I just don't think I don't think he's as good as he was in that magical 2019 year. I just think it's once in a lifetime. We'll never see another season like it. Played by a Raven anyway. There might be somebody else in our lifetimes who has as good a season, but I don't think there's any shame in that. I don't think there's any shame in saying that Lamar has bounced around a little bit below that level, and now he's back up somewhat close to it, and that to me is a huge win.
Totally agree. Can't complain about his sort of trajectory in learning and mastering the quarterback position. And your aggregate results aren't always going to be your feedback. Right. So
that's true.
So that's something to keep in mind. Just
like your yardage is not going to be your feedback. I mean, it's not the Ravens don't play for yardage; they play for wins.
Yep.
And I used to always say yardage talk is loser talks. I really don't want to hear yardage related things. Now, I'm points related things always. And if you're a fan of the 2000 Ravens defense, you definitely want to start talking points and not yards. They were amazingly. The Titans allowed fewer yards than the Ravens that year, but the Titans defense wasn't nearly as good as the Ravens. That's for sure. I want to say one other thing about the 23 team that I think on balance, and I'm obviously not that happy about the Beckham signing. I'm not happy about the Yassine signing in terms of their aggregate value, but on balance, I think they got excellent value out of the free agency class. It was Clowney and Van Noy, Mollett playing a not insignificant role for this team. Darby playing a very big role for not much money for this team. Nelson Aguilar, you do have to consider the comp pick, but I think they got value for Nelson Aguilar. I don't think they got tooled, and that's what I thought was really happening at the beginning of the year is that they'd made a very bad move on the Nelson Aguilar signing. And I think 6th round draft pick, $3 million. I think that's pretty much what his year was worth. I wouldn't do it for a team that wasn't very close. I'm getting some feedback here, but I think his actual performance was at a high level.
Yeah, Nelson Aguilar won them games. He proved to be a very valuable free agent, and honestly, this was probably Eric DaCosta's finest roster construction job. Not just who he signed, but for how much and when he signed. I mean, to get Van Noy either at or after week 4 and have him, come and contribute career highs in sacks. I mean, that's just outrageous, and to basically, have your outside linebacker, position decimated by, injuries to, Bowser and Ojabo. Yeah. And be able to replace them with, 2 veterans who both turned in their career finest performances. I mean, it really, aside from, the couple of aforementioned signings, they got the right guys at great prices. I think I would certainly say that the balance tilts in favor of what DaCosta did this year.
Right. Well, me too. Who else do we have? Any other things? I mean, I guess the other thing I'd point to is, they finally got the number 1 seed, and I can only tell you, as a season ticket holder, that means an awful lot to me. I've never got to watch the AFC Championship game at home. If I know if you watch it on TV, you still probably care that it was in Baltimore, but I think you probably care less than a season ticket holder. I think that's naturally the way it occurs. And, a lot of people got to see that game and may not get to see the game again for another 20 years here. So that was a big deal. That also obviously is part of the reason this is so bitter. The loss was so bitter.
Yeah, I mean, let's not forget, Lamar finally had a playoff game where he completely dominated against a good Texans team that came in with a pretty good plan. And Lamar executed well. Todd Monken adjusted well at halftime. Feels like a long time ago, but that is the next step in the sort of evolution. We would have hoped that maybe that we would have taken the next 2 or 3 steps, but the point is we went forward, not backward. Or even just stayed in the same place. We went forward, and that's why it's a successful season.
Well, looking at the game on Sunday, is there how would you talk about accountability relating to that game?
So a couple things. I mean, just a couple of quick hits. I'm extremely satisfied with what Mike McDonald and the defense did. Basically the brand of defense that the Ravens played was essentially, you're going to have to play perfect football in order to score on us. And that's basically what the Chiefs did for the first 2 drives. And then, the Ravens made their in-game adjustments and, shut them out in the second half. I mean, if you hold a Patrick Mahomes offense, which, yes, this is the worst offense of the Patrick Mahomes era, but they played better in their prior 2 playoff games than they had the entire season. They were, clicking and on fire. So this is not, don't look at the regular season for context. They did a great job. So I'm very happy with what Mike McDonald and the defense did. I've also heard a lot of talk about Zay Flowers. Yes, I think more than anything else, I'm kind of bothered by the taunting. I have a real tough time, complaining about the fumble. I think that is more so an incredible play by Snead. I mean, 99 times out of the 100, that's a touchdown. He's diving for the goal line. You think that that's going to be a touchdown. I mean, maybe, he could have, possibly just run it in. But he was trying to score, and it was just an incredible play. I mean, sometimes, the defender makes an incredible play. It happened with Lee Evans, right? Yeah. It's just remarkable.
I think if I were to, look at Flowers' performance, the reaching for the goal line did follow the rules that they have said of, you keep both hands on the football and you're allowed to reach for the goal line. And so you didn't really have a problem with that. And I don't either, but it is a place where better on-field awareness, he probably takes the first down and doesn't try and score. And he had the first down at about the 1 yard line. And it looked like that would have been a slam dunk to get that and give up on the touchdown. So, from that perspective, I thought there's a little bit of a lack of on-field awareness. It's something to grow off of. In his case, the taunting penalty as well. Obviously he made a couple great plays in the game. Had 115 yards receiving. That I don't think the Chiefs had given up a 100-yard receiver the entire year. So that's really impressive. Did the things in this game, and I like this about Monk and I like this about Lamar and about Flowers, to get behind the defense and make some plays instead of being a gadget guy or even like a short yardage guy who's going to try and make something happen exclusively after the catch. There was opportunity to do things after the catch, and he took advantage of a lot of that. But more than that, he was behind the defense on this game, and that was very important for the Ravens.
Yeah, I agree, and it's hard to be too mad at a guy who he was your offense. He really put the team on his back on a number of drives and a number of plays. I don't know if you've had a chance to watch the broadcast in full again, but my heart really went out to him when he was very much just panicking on the sidelines. He was so distressed. And it's just a young guy, under more pressure than he's ever been in his life. He's going to learn. He's going to grow. He is going to be a star for us, and I'm thrilled and excited to see what his next season is going to look like.
So we brought this up with three men in mind: Lamar, Harbaugh, and Monk. And who would you like to talk about among that group?
I think I would start with Lamar. With Lamar, I think that. There are just some tendencies and some things that he needs to work on. First of all, I think that he really needs to learn to just be satisfied with taking what the defense gives them. Sometimes, yes, there can be a play that's out there that, boy, if I hit this play, it's going to be an incredible play and it's going to be a slam dunk. And when you're Lamar Jackson, you can hit those plays. And I understand that. But sometimes it's worth it to just take profit, right? He had no business throwing into triple coverage to Isaiah Likely. Right. He had no business, throwing a lot of these low percentage deep balls, just hoping that his, players would run him down. There are a number of plays where Rashad Bateman was open. This has been a problem all season. I don't know. Mercurial might be a bit of a harsh word, but Lamar kind of has a little bit of like a fickleness to him where he, might just prefer the style of one guy's play over another. The best guy is the open guy. And when Lamar learns that, and when Lamar learns to take profit, when Lamar learns to minimize the negative, right? That's when he's really going to take the next level. There were seasons where Peyton Manning was throwing to guys who were just like complete scrubs because they were, because the wide receiver room was decimated, but he was making those guys look good because he threw to the guy who was open. I mean,
I would love a more distribution of the football from Lamar in the future. I think it's one of the steps forward he can still take. I think we did see, some steps forward this year. One of the things about what accountability looks like in terms of Lamar is, well, we'll talk about some specifics from this game, and I have a thing or two. There is no long-term accountability question for Lamar. He's now your franchise quarterback. He's our guy. Just the same way the Cleveland is stuck with Deshaun Watson. He's their guy. They don't have a choice to move off Deshaun Watson. We don't have a choice to move off Lamar Jackson, but we wouldn't want to. It's a much better position to be in from that perspective. But I thought from this game, the one thing I would point to that didn't work out as well is Lamar didn't make very much out of his ample time and space opportunities. And this is a game the offensive line played their hearts out. They had a lot of extra man pressures. At times they did not even pick those up well, but they still had 44% ATS in this game, including 12 in the fourth quarter. And Lamar only averaged 5.9 yards per throw on that, and all three of the turnovers came there. Now, one of them, of course, was Flowers' fumble, which didn't have anything to do with Lamar, but one was the interception, one was another fumble in the pocket after ample time and space that Lamar held onto the football. So if I had to point to one thing, that would be it. Of course, on the other side, and the problem was, of course, this is a game where they get the most ATS they've had, the whole year. They get 22 ample time and space opportunities. They were pressured only 13 times, 13 out of 41, so it's 32%. And on those plays, he had 8.8 yards per throw, which is what I refer to as an inverted result by Lamar. So unusual, but certainly did some wonderful things to get out of pressure. But on the other hand, he did not particularly do well from the pocket, just throwing the football.
Yeah, it almost feels like sometimes that like Lamar is, battling all the things that people are saying about him. I'm not a mind reader. Obviously, I don't know what's going on in his head, but, I think he would do well to trust what trust what he's seeing, trust the fact that you've got 10 teammates who are there to help you win. You don't have to do it all. You don't have to, make them like most amazing explosive play every time. And, sometimes if Patrick Ricard is out there in the flat and he's going to get you the 3 yards you need, that's, then go ahead and do that. Take that profit.
Would have been nice to see some of those kind of balls going in. Well, let's talk about Todd Monken for a little bit in terms of his. We did know going in that this would be a game of adjustments on both sides. Spagnuolo made a big one in the second half, and I'll talk about that a little bit. But it was a back and forth, and I would definitely have to say that Spags got the best of Monken on this day.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you've been watching the Ravens for any number of years, I mean, you remember Cam Cameron, forgetting that Ray Rice ever existed, and the stats just kept growing and growing and growing. If you don't run Ray Rice X number of times, you're not winning that game. We were the number one rushing team in the league. The Chiefs' defensive weakness is certifiably the run defense. Mm-hmm. And we didn't test it. And we didn't make Spagnuolo adjust to that. It's malpractice. I think Monken's game plan was awful. I think his inability to adjust was awful. And I think that, this goes to both Harbaugh and Monken, but when you see your quarterback struggling because he's pressing, you're seeing some of the players maybe not quite as sharp as they do, the pressure's getting to them. There are ways to simplify and slow down the game. And the Ravens didn't take those opportunities. 6 rushes from the running backs. That's crazy. That's the number of Super Bowls that Tom Brady won in New England. Like that, that's crazy.
It's a low number. It is a low number. And they going into this game, the Chiefs were playing without their biggest interior lineman, Noddy, who's up right around 320 pounds. So they were very undersized. Tershawn Wharton, who had a pretty good game, I think he drew a holding call, and he was in there for part of a sack at least. He might have actually had a sack. But anyway, he had a good game himself. He's like 285 to 290 pounds. I mean, he's a really light guy. You've got to try and, get him on the ground, get him pushed back on some plays. And the nice 15-yard run early on had all of those elements to it. Actually, Simpson had a cycle block on the play, a pull, a pancake, a level 2 block, and what am I missing here? A pull, a pancake, level 2 block, and a highlight. All of the same play. So you don't get that very often. He actually blocked 2 guys on the play, and they got a 15-yard play. And to not be doing more of trying to out physical them, and specifically out physical them up the middle of the field, in the middle of the field, was something I wasn't too happy about. I would have liked to see Edwards on the field for more time. And the other guy who only got 15 snaps is Patrick Ricard. 15 snaps. I mean, if you're going to run the football, you have Patrick Ricard on the field. If you want to show the other team that you might run the football, have Patrick Ricard on the field. There's another important thing here. If you want to be successful with the pass, you got to at least give some notion that you might run the ball.
We made ourselves one-dimensional. We broadcasted that we're going to be one-dimensional. Things that we know, right? We know that running is a way to, wear down a defensive line. We know that running is a way to give your offensive line a break. We know, that running sets up play action, and you decide to take all of those things away. And the game script absolutely never dictated it until, if you want to say the second to last drive on that, is dictated, pass first or third to last drive, whatever.
Yep.
The game was never out of hand. They even with this terrible coaching job by Monken, and I do think it was a terrible, absolutely awful coaching job by Monken. We still had a chance to win it for a good portion of the game. And I don't know what was in his head. I don't know what he was trying to prove. It feels like one of those things that, I've mentioned before, that when a coach's sort of ego gets in the way and they want to, I've got such a great, plan. Maybe it looks like a great plan because you saw something on film. That's fine, but it's not working. And if it's not working, you have to change it. That's what halftime's for.
Well, yeah, the other team was certainly there and making changes. So in terms of Monken's entire body of work for this year, how do you weight this game against him relative to all the positive things he had happen during the year?
Well, that's tough. I think if you're calling this year a success, which I am, certifiably a huge part of that is Todd Monken. I think that he took Lamar's game to a new level in several different aspects, and took our offense to a new level in several different aspects. He said that he was going to make us multiple, and he did. He said he was going to make us, make other teams have to defend the same, each blade of grass, and he did. And so all of that's a tremendous success. All that's very exciting to build off of. But the better that his success was leading up to this game makes it all the more painful and baffling and frustrating and disappointing that he abandoned all of it, because we weren't multiple and we weren't the number one rushing team like we had been. And he didn't use the things that made us better. And I guess this is a small thing, and they may have just felt like they were too limited by Andrews' kind of ability at that point, just coming back off of injury. So I don't know about that, but I also think it's kind of a failure that he didn't figure out in the times that he had both of them available to them how to make use of Andrews and Isaiah Likely, who are absolutely two of the best, offensive threats that we have.
Well, he's a guy who at Georgia was known as a 12 personnel guy, adapted well to who he had. Obviously, part of 12 this year included Ricard because they didn't really use a fullback all that often. But this last game was really unusual in terms of almost no 12 personnel. They had a little bit of 12 with Ricard for about 15 snaps, but the rest of the game, it was usually either Andrews or Likely, but not both. Couple snaps with Kolar on the field with one of the other. But honestly, not really. It wasn't 12 with Likely and Andrews that they were running. It was 12 with other pairings there that they were doing. They actually had 5 tight ends on the field by position where they lined up on the one Lamar 20-yard run for the first down on 4th and 1. But that was you don't see that very often, and it completely telegraphed what they were doing, but it was still kind of fun. Let's move on.
No, I'm with you. Move on to Harbaugh.
Sure.
Yeah. So I think what accountability kind of looks like for Harbaugh. Some of it's sort of the same stuff that we talked about with Monken. I don't think that it's realistic to expect that John Harbaugh is going to be, checking in after every play and asking Todd Monken why he did something or other. Although, I do think that I don't think it's crazy to sort of, a quarter into a game, sort of, check in on your headset and say, hey, let's mix in some more runs. We've seen Harbaugh do some things like that before, and even more so at halftime. And I refuse to accept the proposition that John Harbaugh is going to be a potted plant on game day. Yeah, he's not a coordinator, but he's been around this game long enough. He is the boss. He makes the call, and if something's not working, it's incumbent upon him to, particularly when it's a do or die situation, to lead as he sees fit, in a way to make things kind of, change the course of things.
I mean, first of all, it's very fairly put in terms of what it is. I think there is a natural runoff blame where you can't really blame Lamar, or you can't do anything about Lamar. If Lamar were really the problem, which I don't really believe he was, you had a somewhat down game here, though. That would be fair to say. He certainly wasn't the problem in general for the season, is what I'm saying. Given the fact that Monken was the problem, there's still a kind of a blame running to Harbaugh nature of things, where any little surplus blame, and that it can go to ridiculous lengths, to some things that Harbaugh has no direct responsibility for, and oftentimes no indirect responsibility for. Things like assembling a roster are sometimes ascribed as, this is Harbaugh screwing it up again. Well, it didn't have anything to do with Harbaugh. He might have had some discussion with EDC about how a roster was assembled, but it wasn't him. I think Harbaugh's season was so successful from at least a couple of different points. And first of all, the overall success of the team, he's got to get credit for, just as he takes it when there's failure, like there was. The overall success of the team, obviously, tremendous. The other thing you got to look at is the hiring ability of John Harbaugh. These are very siloed decisions within the Ravens organization. What I mean by that is the general manager is not making decisions about which coaches to hire. So don't get that in your head that's happening. That's Harbaugh's purview. And in fact, by the same token, Harbaugh never has the final say in telling EDC who to draft. He might have input, just the same way EDC might give input if asked. But Harbaugh's coaching staff is his hiring responsibility, and they've done just a remarkable job at assembling a Hall of Fame coaching staff here that naturally is going to be in demand after a big season like this. And they're losing a bunch of guys. And it's not a terrible thing. It's just like having a great draft and eventually losing a bunch of free agents, like the 2020 draft is basically walking out the door after this year. It is just the way of things. And believe me, the other side of the coin, where you hire bad coaches and then you still have to go back the next year and hire different bad coaches, that's a hell of a lot worse situation than hiring Mike Macdonald and having him leave after 2 years.
For sure. I think when the range of opinions, right, on Harbaugh range from he should be fired today versus he is unimpeachable for all time because he won us a Super Bowl. And I don't think either one of those positions is really appropriate, nor do I think that's where Steve Bisciotti fits on either part of the spectrum. The fact of the matter is, before Lamar, took a snap for the Ravens, it was widely reported and never disputed that Harbaugh and the Ravens were going to mutually part ways. And, I think if you are Steve Bisciotti, you have to look at what's been accomplished and what's been left not accomplished since then, and obviously you take into account injuries and you take into account, all the things that can kind of go to explain why things go some way and don't go another. The question is, right, is Harbaugh, a guy who can get you back to where you need to be? Because like for example, the Eagles, very successful with Andy Reid for a number of years, and very successful with Doug Peterson for a number of years. But I think at some point that they came to the conclusion with each of those coaches, you're a great coach, you could be successful elsewhere. I don't think you're the right guy for here at this time. And if you're Steve Bisciotti viewing the manner in which the game kind of got away from them after this season, I think what you want to hear from Harbaugh is certainly something better than what he gave the media this week, right? That's just kind of how the game went, which we've heard a variation of that, a dozen times before. And, I think he was responding to why did they abandon the run? And it's not even accurate because that's not how the game went. The game script almost never dictated that. I'm hoping that in conversations with Steve Bisciotti, Harbaugh has a plan to sort of take how am I going to reach Lamar in those moments when the game is going to be, where I need to make his job easier? How am I going to put the staff around him that he's going to connect with, that's going to kind of change his philosophy a little bit in terms of, you don't have to do it all, Lamar. You need to trust your teammates in this, that, and the other situation. At the end of the day, Steve Bisciotti is the only guy who can hold John Harbaugh accountable. But I think that he ought to be looking for some answers after this, after the way in which this season ended, because you can say all the great things that you want, and you can lose about how the regular season went. And it's possible to lose every single or any particular playoff game. It's not the fact that we lost. It's just the manner in which we lost, I hope, disturbs Steve Bisciotti somewhat, and I hope that he's looking for a little bit more from John Harbaugh.
Well, I think it probably does. And one of the things, and in some ways, the only way he can start to fix this thing is to have a unbelievable year of off-season hiring again in terms of the coaches he brings in and whatnot. I mean, this game is now gone. So if you're talking about accountability in terms of the future, you can say this game is now gone and you're fired, but I don't think they're going to go that way. And so now it's a matter of what does he need to do? What plan does he need to do in order to do it? I like your idea of having Lamar be more reachable. I think Lamar being more of the field general also probably is a good thing. And I think having a general, plan that would be developed differently by game generally has worked. Now, if you look at this year, though, the Ravens, every time they've needed to run the ball and wanted to run the ball, they've been pretty much able to do it. They closed out games like no other team. They hit the Fangio line every game until this Chiefs game. By the way, they missed the Fangio line. It was it's kind of difficult to go and point to the problem has been the problem when it's never been the problem before, and the one time that it really lets you down, then you say, oh no, that's the thing that's going to get you fired. I mean, that's a kind of a fan reaction that I never kind of can give a lot of credibility to. I think you've done a better job this time, Slav, of coming up with, here's some things I'd like to see, but it kind of requires that. I mean, John Harbaugh's record speaks for itself in terms of all the wins, the playoff appearances. He now had 4 out of 5 here. There have been some injuries his team has certainly had to work through in these last 5 years that it's been relatively amazing. They've made it 4 out of 5. They've had some success in the playoffs, not great success, but they're 2-4 now, not 0-6. And there's plenty of other historical examples of quarterbacks who didn't get it done nearly as quickly as Lamar did in terms of postseason success. So I'm not at a point where baby and bathwater are being thrown out here, whether that means Harbaugh or deciding that Lamar Jackson somehow isn't the guy. I don't see any likelihood of either of that. The one guy whose job is in a little bit of jeopardy over what happened is Monken. And I don't think he's really in any jeopardy for this coming year either.
No, I don't think so either. I think something you alluded to before is they don't really have the luxury of moving on from Lamar or anything like that. So for better or for worse, which I think much better. Don't get me wrong. They're in bed with Lamar on this thing. I think at the end of the day, Steve Bisciotti has to look at, you take the good, everything that you mentioned before, but you also take that with, 3 playoff wins since the Super Bowl. You take, it's not a question of, are you a very good coach or are we going to have very good results? It's, are you the guy that's going to get us to where we need to go? And I'm not saying that this season was a clear example that he's not that guy. It's just, I think Steve Bisciotti very rightly ought to be looking at the fact like we're gonna be going into year 7 of Lamar's career, and you've got year 7 in Lamar's career. What are our steps to success? And I think that he should hold John Harbaugh to it.
Okay, well, fair enough, and it's an interesting thing. I'd like to be a fly on the wall in the Jupiter meetings this year to see to hear what would go on in terms of those discussions. For one thing, I think there's probably some individual meetings that occur. Some of it's about building the franchise and how we're going to address free agency and whatnot, which that would be interesting as hell in terms of to hear that. But some of the personal accountability conferences that would happen, those would be a lot of fun to hear exactly what's going on. But it wouldn't surprise me if he had some practical things he wanted to see from John, but I don't think it's going to be results based. I don't think it's going to be win the Super Bowl. I think it's going to be something like prove that you still hire the right people year after year. Prove that you still are intervening when it's appropriate. I mean, Bisciotti's a hiring guy. He's not some babe in the woods in terms of understanding important things about how a football team should operate and when it's probably organizationally structured correctly. And that's where I think he both has something to add and also some less risk than a Jerry Jones to just go off and do something fucking stupid because of who he is.
Yeah, Bisciotti's not, I don't have any, belief that Bisciotti's going to sit here and start, ultimatum, if this isn't accomplished by this date, this is the, whatever the problem. But I think he certainly, let's forge a path forward. Let's figure out what we can do to make this, everything that we know it can be. And that's what makes him one of the best owners in the league, right? If not the best. So we're very fortunate, and I'm looking forward to another great season.
And we're as Baltimore Orioles fans right now, we're kind of assuming that the Orioles owner is going to be as good as Bisciotti. We should be so lucky, right? if that happens. I hope he's basically a provide the money, be non-interventionist, and still provide organizational thought that's really useful. The guy who bought the Orioles, by the way, I don't know if you know this, he owns the only privately held copy of the Magna Carta.
I did see that. That's outrageous.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. I heard Bill Gates bought the Da Vinci's Codex, right? The only one that's in private hands, I think.
I think you're right about that. Yeah.
So these guys, that's a really unbelievable thing. But anyway, apparently very much a history buff, and that was in the Sun today. I was shocked by that. I was doing that. By the way, if you don't know this, Johnny Unitas's Super Bowl ring from 1958 is up for auction this weekend.
Oh wow! All right, you're gonna put it on that, Ken?
We'll see. It might be out of my price range. I think they're predicting the 58 ring is going to go for somewhere between 100 and 250, and they usually kind of bid a little bit, or they started a little bit on the low end to try and entice some people who might be on the margin, to try and get involved in that bidding. So it's an interesting one.
Well, good luck bidding.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And I don't think I will be, but thank you. Slava, always a pleasure doing this show with you. This will be our last show for the year. Slava is going to be a lot of off-season content. And then hopefully we'll get a chance to do the show again next year, Slava, if your schedule allows. But tell folks where they can talk football with you online.
I'm on Twitter at Slava Cooperstein. That's SLAVAKUPERSTEIN.
All right. Outstanding. Other folks out there who want to be on a Film Study short, hit me up. DMs are always open on Twitter. Last show of a kind of a regular basis for the year. Just want to say, really appreciate the loyalty of all the listeners. You guys are great. And we want to hear more from you in terms of questions. And I also want to hear from you if you have something you want to discuss that would make a nice, entertaining episode for other people to listen to as well. And you can always reach me, of course, on Twitter at Filmstudy Ravens. For Slava Cooperstein, this is Ken McCusick saying goodbye. And we'll talk to you next year at this point. Well, later this year. On one last thing.